Set? Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight to what looks like a clown show, but I think will probably be a really wonderful evening. Thank you very much, virtual audience, for joining us. And I want to welcome people from KJCC. How many of you are here from the KJC Book Club? A few. Right. Well, we love having you. And as I understand it, Nathan has a special prize tonight that members of the KJG's, I can't say it, I donate to it. Lots of money. You'd think that I could actually say it. Anyway, and we have some giveaways here. But this is a very special evening to have thriller authors here tonight. Where's David? David over here. David McCloskey. We actually talked his publisher into letting us have the books 2 weeks early, which says a lot for your clout there, kid. Or mine. Or mine, right. But in any case, so we're delighted to have David's book here for you. It doesn't actually publish for a while. So if you get it signed, I recommend you have him date your book as well, because that is extra cool. Next to David is Don Bentley, who will be back on September 30th. He is now writing the Mitch Rapp, Vince Flynn books. And the handoff from Kyle Mills to Don took place here, and now Don is on his own. Are you on your own?
So sad.
I don't know. It's possible that Kyle will fly in from Spain just for the evening, and Don will be here with Mark Cameron, who's a wonderful writer, whose character, he used to write Tom Clancy Sr. There's a whole evolving door here. Which one of you wants to make the announcement? You're going to make it? He's going to make it. Well, give me 1 sec. Anyway, the Tom Clancy franchise keeps evolving. And tonight, Mike is here with Jack Ryan Jr., but he has an announcement, which I think is very exciting that we were able to make tonight. So, Mike.
Well, yes, I have been running the Jack Ryan Jr. franchise for the last couple of years. Actually took over from this guy over here, Don Bentley.
And wrote the highest rated books. Mike's are the highest rated in the series.
Oh, thank you, Don. Well, I am pleased to be passing that torch to this guy here, Jack Stewart. We're going Army, Navy, Navy. And I'm taking over the Jack Ryan Sr. next couple of
Mark
books. Cameron,
whom I just mentioned, will be here with Don. Mark Cameron was writing Jack Ryan Sr. It's hard to keep up, but I think, I guess something you could talk about tonight is writing Tom Clancy, kind of hone your skills to writing other things. We'll find out from this event. Anyway, Don is our host, so I'm going to go over here and sit in the corner and listen.
Hey, everybody, welcome. So I'm kind of a lazy writer, which means I have a lot of time, but I only have time to read 2 books. So I've read David's and Mike's, one of Mike's, because Mike is an overachiever, and Barbara is going to chime in with Jack. And so if I'm not asking Jack questions, it's not because I don't like him that much, but I'm going to ask the other 2. So there's a thing that when you're a writer, you read each other's books, and because we are all small people, the best part of reading a book is when you read it and you're like, I can do better than that. Or you just read it and you're like, one day they'll be as good as I am. But then there's another kind of book that you read where you have to close it for a minute and think, that is good, and it's so good, I don't think I can ever be that good. And then you are in this uncomfortable choice. Do you continue to read and prove yourself right, or do you just close it? And so I had that opportunity this time, not once, but twice, with the Persian and with Red Tide. I keep wanting to call it Crimson Tide because of Denzel Washington there. And so both of these books, they're in 2 different but adjacent genres. And so my questions to these 2 guys are going to follow them, but both of them have done something in this genre, in their respective genres, that's really special. That is, they've elevated the genre. They've taken something. In Mike's case, the military thriller genre has been around for a long time. What Mike did was harken back to what Tom Clancy did with Red Storm Rising, and he did it that good. And so when you read it, you're like, oh my gosh, why, Mike? Why couldn't you suck a little more? And David has done something very much similar with the Persian, in that it's a fantastic book, and you know it's fantastic because the main freaking character is a Swedish dentist, and you still care about him. And so, with that, Mr. McCloskey, what is The Persian about?
Thanks, Don. It always makes me uncomfortable when you say nice things about me, so thank you. So The Persian it's about a lot of things. It is about a Swedish dentist of Persian Jewish extraction who winds up working for the Mossad. And it really, what I did was I looked at all of the different kind of assassinations that the Mossad has undertaken in Iran over the last 15 to 20 years, and kind of flipped it on its head, and thought about what would it look like if the Iranians had that kind of capability inside Israel, and how might that happen, and what would the Israeli response be? And so at like kind of the geopolitical level, it's this kind of war of assassinations between Israel and Iran. I wrote all of this before we undertook the largest B-2 bombing raid in world history. So there are aspects of this where, maybe it appears like quaint historical fiction now, because it doesn't feature that. It's not about Iran's nuclear program, but it is trying to deal very realistically with the shadow war between Israel and Iran. And at a very human level, what I tried to set up was an intelligence operation that in some ways is like the movie The Sting, where the question in that movie is, can you con somebody so well that they don't know that they've actually been conned at the end? And the heart of the book is this sort of operation that our very clever dentist undertakes to trick a woman into working for the Israelis without knowing that she's working for the Israelis. And calamity ensues as the story goes on.
So one of the things that makes this book so fantastic is David gives away the ending of the book in the first chapter from the standpoint of he has this really unique convention in which the book is taking place during several different timelines, but when the book starts that the mission fails because the main character is writing his confession out, and that is the book. But somehow he still keeps it incredibly tense. And so talk a little bit, not too much nerdy writer inside baseball, because these people don't care about that, but talk a little bit about how you wrote that, why you decided to structure that story that way. I mean, you already were swinging for the fences by having a dentist be the main protagonist. Why go further, Mr. McCloskey?
Yeah, so the book is structured, I guess maybe a third or more of it is structured as the dentist's confession. He's been caught by the Iranians, and he's being forced to write out kind of his final confession. He's been in captivity for about 3 years, has written a lot, and this is kind of the last one before he's executed. And honestly, I started writing this character. His name's Kamran Esfahani. He goes by Cam. I started writing this character from the first person. I don't know why, to be honest. As I started sketching him, that was the way the character came to me. I'm a pretty, my writing process is very much to start with a setting and to go from setting to character and then to go to plot. And so the way I found this character was writing him in the first person. And that sort of got me into a lot of trouble as I kept writing the book, because I was trying to add other perspectives in from the Israeli side, from Mossad, and then from the side of the asset that he recruits, a woman named Roya Shabani. And I could not obviously capture their perspectives through his first person. And so I had to come up with a mechanism to enable me to move between first person and kind of third person throughout the book. And so I came up with this confession and kind of structuring it as different chapters in his confession to kind of, be the arc of the novel. And it was really hard to write. It was very complicated. The timelines got screwed up all the time. I ended up with one of the 2 or 3 of the characters actually, when I was about to turn in the book, I realized I had their ages wrong because I had screwed up the timeline. So it introduced a lot of complexities, but I really met the character in the first person, and that's why I chose to do it that way.
So I'm going to ask David one more question in this series before I jump the mic. And this is the one, like, my job is to make someone cry or sweat up here. And so we'll see which he does, but this is the question and it's going to do it. After reading this book, a reader could come to the conclusion that you hate Tim McGraw. Why is that true?
So I had a lot of fun with this one. So Cam has been in prison in Iran for 3 years, undergoing a tremendous amount of sort of psychological and physical torture. And one of the things that the Iranians have done as punishment is put him in his cell and play the same song over and over again for days and days on end. And I was trying to figure out what song that would be. And I remembered, I think it came out when I was in high school, being very agitated by a Tim McGraw song called Truck Yeah. And so I went back and listened to it a couple times, and I was again agitated. And so I feel kind of bad. I hope Tim McGraw doesn't read the book, because I actually kind of like Tim McGraw as a human, but I don't like that song. And so part of his torture was to listen to Tim McGraw Truck Yeah over and over again from an Iranian prison.
Mr. McGraw, we're sorry. We're very, very sorry. All right, Mike, we're going to jump to you. So one of the things that's kind of, for people who don't read this genre a lot, especially for a big, epic military thriller like what you've written, kind of the convention is that it's all plot, it's all action, and where we as writers fall short is on the characters. And you flip that on its head in that you chose to write this book through the points of view of a father and 3 of his sons. And so talk about that a little bit, why you chose to do that, how it influences the book, and then kind of what the book's about.
Well, yeah, thank you. I, like David said, I also start with character and then go to plot, and I think that's a good way to drive emotion, because when you know these people and you start, and that can also solve writer's block, because you're like, I'm going to put these guys together and just let them go. I know that sounds a little bit nuts, but it kind of works. And so that's generally my technique. But one of the things that I wanted to communicate in this book was around families and service and sacrifice and that kind of thing, and to really bring that home as something that I wanted just general Americans to sort of read and go, man, where do we find salt of the earth people like this? And that was just very important to me, to talk about people who had been in lifelong service. I was also a big fan of, growing up, some books that had a big influence on me, like Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer was one of my favorite books. And that was the feeling that I took away from that, and it never left me. So I wanted to try to do the same thing, but bring a little bit more modern geopolitics and tactical realism into it.
Yeah, so the book takes place in the South China Sea primarily, and involves a conflict between China and Taiwan. And so that is not unplowed ground. Like, there have been tons of books about that. I guess talk why you chose that as the focus point for your book. And then you also took that conflict and set it up in a very unique way as kind of the catalyst for it. So talk about your choice there, and then the catalyst that you use.
Sure. So I spent 25 years in tech and actually worked for a Taiwanese company. And one of the things that you begin to understand, you start to see different points of view. I wanted to represent some different points of view, both the Chinese side, the Taiwanese side, the American side. And I started this book a while ago because I was also writing the Clancy books. And when I started it, I started it as a trade war and an embargo where the Americans basically say, hey, China, we're not going to give you these chips, because you could use them for AI and you could outflank us and you could use them for military tech. I had no idea that 2 years later that would happen. And so I wanted to create what was a geopolitical issue around trade and economics. And one of the things when you study the relationship between China and the U.S. is you realize there's a massive interdependence there. And China is massively dependent on an export economy. And so I started to think a lot about, well, if that's true, we've seen what happened when Russia went into Ukraine, right? They're shunned by the world, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to play around with the idea of China doing kind of a half war, kind of doing something where they could point to some justification. And the U.S. embargo on the chips was the thing that kicks that off. That was the idea.
Yeah. So another great thing.
Sorry, we're talking about red tide. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things your book has in common with David is unusual characters. So the father and the three sons are all. Two of the sons are military members. The third son is a member of the Merchant Marines. But there's a character that's very pivotal to the book who is off the wall, and it's this reservist guy. And so talk a little bit about that and why he was critical to the story, because you took what was very standard in this genre, that it's a big force-on-force, and then you added something, I think, probably from your industry background that really took this in a new direction.
Yeah, I spent some time with Silicon Valley companies and I've seen a shift over the last couple of years where successful entrepreneurs are much more interested in national security. We're seeing this right now. And Wheel, I think, is and so, for example, the Department of War recently said that they're going to create a new group where you will get a commission, and you're basically an entrepreneur, but you're part of this new tech economy because it has so many applications in defense. And I was starting to see that. I was starting to see a growing awareness. So I had the character he's referring to is a very successful venture capitalist, but he's passionate about the defense of the United States, and he happens to be a former naval officer who stayed in the reserves. And he's also, well, I won't give any spoilers, but he's got some other personal issues that makes him even more passionate. And I like the idea of that angle of sacrifice as well.
And he had one more on him because he does this really unique thing. So before I got to write full time, I worked in the defense space, and there are about 50 million acronym things that are like Air Force Experimentation Lab, the Army Futures Command. There are gazillions of things, and then all the ones out in Silicon Valley trying to harness this. And so far, the results have been pretty mixed. But this guy does something where what you set up that's really interesting is you have the old guard that's like, this is how we've always fought wars. This is how we're going to fight this one. And then you get this little scrappy guy that's 130 pounds that's from Silicon Valley, and he's like, no, listen to me. And so you actually, you play that out and then have him set up kind of his own organization and stuff. And I guess talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to hit on was, or a theme is, we don't want to, the American defense industry shouldn't constantly be preparing to fight the last war. And if you study China, one of the things that you learn is that when Desert Storm happened and the United States just walked over, Soviet equipment, et cetera, in Iraq, pretty much the whole rest of the world stood back and said, whoa, these guys are on a whole other level, and started to really build almost like a leapfrog strategy, a military, particularly in China's case, that would go much beyond American capabilities. Whereas if you look at our Navy today and much of the equipment today, it's very recognizable from Desert Storm, which is now 30 years ago plus. And so I wanted him to be pointing out that innovation needs to move to the next level. And it isn't just innovation of machines, it's innovation around procurement and how we solve problems, et cetera, because we see so much of this in industry, but we don't necessarily see it in defense. So I created an admiral who deliberately harkens back often to, say, Admiral Nimitz. And if you know the Battle of Midway, Admiral Nimitz, I think it was the Yorktown, it got messed up, and he needed to turn it around to go do this ambush on the Japanese in the Battle of Midway. And the ship was so messed up, and the yards told him, oh, it's going to take 6 months to fix this thing. And he said, I need it in 72 hours. And they did it. And so that's the kind of the clarion call that a lot of these heroes were told, like, you have to think differently about this. If it stays the way it's been calcified for the last 30 years, we're done. And so that was the inspiration there.
You know, I find that really interesting because I read something today about the effect that if the British had just like gotten their game together, they could have nailed us in the Revolutionary War. But they were still fighting, you know, formations on the European battlefield and didn't have any understanding of how we were going to be fighting the war. So, you know, there are plenty of examples of how not moving forward, you know, costs.
Yeah, that's another example of the Army saving the day. So that's kind of what we have done over and over again in history.
Hooah.
Let me ask David one more on research, and then we can jump to Jack if you got some stuff, and then I can go back. So on the topic of research, you and I were discussing this earlier. One of the things David does so well, so he was a former CIA analyst, and so the tradecraft and stuff like that is very well done. But reading his book, he goes to a depth in characters where you understand things about Iranian culture, things about Swedish culture that's more than just this is the town they lived in or here's the clothes that they... It really felt like you understood these people at a visceral level. And so I guess talk about the research that you ended up doing for this book and why Swedish dentistry is different than American.
Yeah, that was one of the harder lessons I had to learn in the research process. Actually, it's true. So the main character, as we said, is a Swedish dentist of Persian Jewish extraction. And so, as I was having I wrote the scenes and done a ton of research, and I was starting to show bits and pieces of the draft to people. And so I thought, okay, well, I've got to find. I had a couple Swedish guys read it for Swedish stuff. I had a number of Iranians read it. I had a number of Israelis and American Jews read it. And then I had a number of dentists read it. So I found a dentist in Dallas, who read it for me and had some helpful comments. And then my editor in the UK said, I actually know a Swedish dentist. Do you want him to look at some of the chapters? And I said, sure. And the Swedish dentist read them, and he's like, you have the numbers of the teeth wrong. And I guess in Sweden, I guess in much of the world, the teeth numbers are different than the way we do it in the States. And so when there isn't that much dentistry in the book, so if you're not into that, I will say if you're looking for dentistry, this isn't the book for you. But there are a couple scenes where he is looking at his Israeli handler's teeth, and he's identifying them by number, and I had them wrong because I was using the American system as opposed to the Swedish system.
Listen, this is so hilarious. I'm probably the only person in the room that has actual experience with Swedish dentistry. We were going on a cruise from Stockholm around the Baltic and ending up somewhere, and we were driving around Sweden, and we were driving from Stockholm across to Göteborg, and I got the most appalling molar, I needed a root canal, and I was just miserable. When your head hurts, everything hurts. So we got to, I can't pronounce it, Gothenburg, but it's pronounced what? I can't do Swedish, whatever it is. There was a dental clinic. So we went to the dental clinic, and the guy took x-rays, and he looked at me, and he said, I wouldn't normally do this, he said, but since you're passing through, I'm going to give you all these drugs and all these antibiotics, and you'll get through your cruise, but you have to promise me that if it goes bad at all, you will not get any Soviet dentistry on this trip. No European dentistry, he said. I am like the last bulwark of dentistry here before you go on this cruise. It's a real story. And you know what? He gave me some really good drugs and some excellent antibiotics, and I got home. But, there's real dentistry in Sweden.
That's right. If Swedish dentistry was on your bingo card tonight, you are the
I'm
big
the winner. I know.
happy.
I really love it. So am I moving on to Jack? Okay. So the only reason that I get to talk to Jack is that, as you can plainly tell, I have no experience with the Navy or the Army or the CIA or whatever, but I have flown. And Jack is a Top Gun instructor. He is a flight guy. So I have some faint idea of what's going on with you. But I want to say, before we talk about the Battleborne series, that if you look up Jack, as I have just done because I couldn't remember the series order, you will see W.E. Griffin popping up, and you will think, what the hell is that? And what that is in this evolving legacy publishing thing that's going on. Jack has actually written a new W.E.B. Griffin novel, and that's what he's going to come and talk to us about in December. So I guess my first question to you would be, are you going to be writing both Griffin and Clancy? And what are you going to do with Battleborne? And maybe Mike will give you a mic so that we can actually talk.
That's all right. It's a good question because I don't even know what I'm writing now. As I like to point out, we were talking tonight. My first book published in 2023, so we're like 2 years later, and I don't even know how many books I have out.
33.
Yeah, 33. It feels like a lot.
Four Battleborne.
Four Battleborne. So I have 4 Battleborne series. The last one, Declared Hostile, which is right there, is the end of the series right now.
Right.
I say right now because the main characters are very near and dear to my heart. I would love to keep writing stories for them, but these other opportunities kept coming up. So I also have
bigger paydays.
bigger paydays, bigger stories, bigger
Right.
reach. I have the Silent Horizon series, which is a co-author project with Chad Robichaux. The first book came out in May, and we still have 2 more books that are coming out. The next one's called Riptide. That'll be out next May. And then the W.E.B. Griffin, which you mentioned, comes out in December. And as far as I know, that's the only one I'm writing for the Griffin estate. But I was really excited to write that one because he was. If any of you guys have read Griffin, you know he's a very unique author. He was a big influence of mine, and so getting to write in his universe was a really cool experience for me.
Right. So what was there about flying jets for the Navy that enabled you to become such a published writer?
I don't know, sitting up and looking out the window. You know, when you're a kid and your teacher says you can't stare out the window and make a living doing that, and I proved him wrong because that's what I do now. But I spent a lot of time looking out the window and coming up with story ideas.
So Jack is still a pilot, which is one reason we get to see him here so often. He's able to come to Scottsdale.
Southwest, if anybody
Right.
flies Southwest.
Don has to pay, and Jack just flies. I know it works out well. Anyway, all I know really about Top Gun is watching Tom Cruise or sitting in the back of the plane. But you do. I was so taken with your very first book, Unknown Rider. The action scenes are amazing. I really felt as though I were in the plane flying along. I mean, you know, and I don't remember which book it is. Is it that one or the second one where he has to do this astonishing landing on and off a carrier?
I feel like that's everyone.
Well, maybe it is, but there was one in particular. And, you know, I mean, I'm old enough to remember Victory at Sea. Probably none of you are. But, you know, there was a marvelous documentary about World War II, and a lot of the footage had to do with, you know, people trying to, and sometimes failing, to land on battleships. Actually, there's a great Admiral Nimitz Museum, Mike, in Texas, right? Is it Fredericksburg?
Yeah,
Which
Fredericksburg.
I have been to. And so, you know, even a civilian like me can sort of understand how airplanes work or don't work. But I think you have a real gift for action scenes.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And as far as flying goes, there's a new documentary out right now on Hulu, I think.
Is there?
And it's about the Navy jet training. So that was one of my. It's on Nat
Is it
Geo.
Nat Geo?
Yeah, Nat Geo. So yeah, that was one of my assignments as an instructor, was teaching new aviators how to land on aircraft carriers. And my wife and I just watched the episode last night where they were taking him out to the carrier and landing for the first time. And I was like, yep, I remember that. I remember that very well.
So we have heard twice now that place or character and then plot. So with you, does it work the same way?
For me, it's actually, I actually think of the plot first, and then the character sort of kind of rises to the top. So Unknown Rider, for instance, that story started with the idea of I read an article about these orbs that were caught swirling around a Navy ship off the coast of San Diego, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. Why would they do that? What would, you know, if it wasn't aliens, which was what the implication was,
That's
what
New
could it be?
Mexico. Come on.
Right.
But
Right.
we're
So what-
not doing ocean in New Mexico often.
Right. So what could it be? And so I thought, well, from a pilot's perspective, what would I experience? And so the pilot sort of rose up to the top of that story. And then it ended up becoming some espionage-related activities with the Chinese. And so I had to have a character that was kind of chasing the Chinese spies down, and so I had my character Punky sort of rise to the top there. So I sort of do it a little bit differently than these guys, but I also sort of find that the characters do things that surprise me, so I sort of give them freedom to do what they want, and I sort of just tell their story.
So Colt is that Top Gun guy, and Punky works for something called NCIS, and there are too many acronyms, as Don has already pointed out. Yeah. What does NCIS stand for?
The Naval Criminal Investigative Service. So they're basically the cops for the Navy that do the investigations. But one of their big responsibilities is counter-espionage, counterintelligence. So if there's any spying related to naval activities, they're involved. And then they get the FBI involved, and Don could speak more about that.
And then we solve the crime for him.
Right. I'm trying to think who it was we had a discussion with the other night about the fact that, there are MPs, there have to be, policing the military. I mean, you've got a whole, we have Reacher, for example.
Yeah, that's Lee Childs.
Well, yeah, but I mean, doesn't every branch basically have some kind of, just like the cops have, internal affairs or whatever it is, doesn't there? How's it work in the spy game? Is there like, I'm sorry about the air conditioning.
We're very responsible. We don't need any oversight.
No traitors in
oversight.
No, none of those. No, I mean, I'm really.
No, there's counter espionage groups inside the agency, and they look at, basically, it's essentially the CIA's internal affairs.
They still look at David.
Yeah, very closely.
Out there. But, that's an eternal question. I mean, it goes all the way back to Plato and the Greeks and all. Who shall govern the governors? And, if you have that kind of power, who is it that's going to keep you in line? I learned that from reading the Oz books, oddly enough. I mean, proving once again how old I am. But Ozma of Oz had this magical wand, and it was all powerful, and she would never let anybody else touch it because she said it would corrupt absolutely anyone. I mean, this is children's books, but it was a really good lesson to learn that, most people can't really deal with I shouldn't even go there at the moment, unlimited power. So, Punky has an interesting job.
Yeah, she does. And, one of the things, if you've read the news lately, you'll see articles about, a sailor that was caught selling secrets to the Chinese. Right. I mean, it's in the news. And that's one of the reasons why I picked China as an antagonist for at least the first part of that series, was because I could pick up the New York Times any given day and find an article about China somehow infiltrating our culture, whether it be in academia, whether it be in industry, whether it be in the military. You're always reading stories about them buying up land in different places around the country. And so it's very pervasive. And as I just retired from the Navy just a couple of years ago, and that was everywhere we went. We were always on guard for people that were innocuous looking, such as our maids in our hotels that were probably working for a foreign intelligence organization, collecting any scraps of information they could get. And so it's out there. And, I don't want it to scare anybody, but I promise you it's out there. And so that's what Punky does. She goes out and she uncovers it.
So she and Colt end up, even though they're in opposite parts of the globe in declared hostile, they actually end up working together.
Yeah, and that was, I think Mike can attest to this being from the intelligence side of things, but, a good military operation cannot exist without good intelligence. And obviously intelligence itself can't affect change. It needs, a strong arm, such as the Army, Don, to do things. And so I have in my series, Colt represents the military and Punky represents the intelligence side of things. And so in a few books, they're not on the same side of the globe, but their stories are intertwined and their actions, affect the other.
So it seems to me that a major challenge for a thriller writer today is, are you anticipating what will come, or are you looking back at what happened? It's very hard to stay in the moment because the moment is shifting so rapidly. And, for years, it was the Cold War. I mean, if you go back to Le Carre and everything. Then we went to the Middle East, and then everything was some kind of a thriller set in the Middle East. Now we have two books or more. Mike and Jack are both writing. They're facing the Pacific again because the threat is arising again, heading that way. It's making me very nervous because I'm going that way twice. I'm going to Japan in October, and to Australia and New Zealand in January. So I'm kind of hoping that, none of this will happen until like April. We'll see. But, so I think a really interesting question for all of you, including you, Don, because, Vince Flynn was really in that kind of Middle East facing thing. How do you decide whether you're going to try to anticipate what's coming or look backward or write for the moment?
So that was one of the questions I had for you. Maybe you should lead off, since your book called The Persian. I mean, something happened over there a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the strikes happened basically once I had sent the book off. So I had no opportunity to update anything to reflect that. My second novel, which is called Moscow X, I just finished the first draft when Putin invaded Ukraine, and so I actually did have an opportunity there to kind of go in and have the book reflect it. But I have never written with the intention of trying to anticipate anything that's coming. Period. I don't think it would be a very good book if I set out, whether it's Israel, Iran, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, and really tried to anticipate what was coming. Like, for me, I never start from the geopolitics of the book or the plot. I always start with kind of the setting. So, the first book I wrote was called Damascus Station. It was Syrian Civil War. That's where I started, Syrian Civil War. Found characters that existed in that war and then wrote the story from there. Second one's Russia. Third one was more domestic. And this one, Israel, Iran. I wanted to write a book set in the middle of that kind of covert conflict, but that was kind of it, and I wanted to write something that was, I was trying to kind of take a creative spin on that conflict by flipping the assassination thing and saying, well, it's not necessarily the Israelis do kill a lot of people in Iran in the book, but it's kind of flipping it and saying, well, what if the Iranians could do this in Israel? Like, I think turning the realities of geopolitics around a little bit can be really interesting, but it's not an effort to anticipate the headlines. I think trying to get out in front of that, I'm not confident that I would be able to do it or that the book would be particularly interesting. I think, for me at least, I kind of write the books for me. I write the books for my nightstand. And I like books where you get into it and you keep turning the pages because you care what happens to the character. Those are the books I try to write.
Yeah, I think so. I'll take it a little different direction, and then maybe Mike, since you were an intelligence officer, you can build on this. I think one of the reasons folks who are in the military or the intelligence community make really good writers is because in the military there's always somebody, if you're at the battalion level or even at the company level, there's somebody who's the S2, that's the intelligence officer, and his or her job when you're bringing the plan together is to put themselves in the mindset of the enemy commander. And so when you actually do the war game and you practice the operation, the S2, he or she will stand on the opposite side and say, as the enemy, this is what I'm doing now, and here's what I'm reacting to what you're doing. And so everybody, even if you're not an intelligence officer like Mike, you probably take a turn where you do that job. And so it gets you in the mindset of saying, how do I think like somebody else and see what they're doing and anticipate it, and then what stories, as an intelligence officer, at least in the tactical military, you spend a lot of time actually coming up with stories to say, what would drive this? What are the reasons why they're acting this way here? And you lay out all of those breadcrumbs and stuff. And so it ends up, for me, it ended up helping a great deal with my writing.
Yeah, well, just picking up that intelligence part of it. My last job in the Navy was for the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and that's a joint command, and it basically has all of the military for the Pacific. And so they train, and contingencies is a big deal. They're trying to anticipate anything that could happen, and it's not always war. There's things called NEOs, or non-combatant evacuation orders, or that, hey, we need to get food into Bangladesh because there's been a flood, things like this. And so I had this this job where I was supposed to come up with these scenarios and then write all the stacks of messages and just kind of confuse everybody as to what was really happening. And it was basically a plot. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? This I do this all day long. So that certainly got me to thinking about that. But I think, Barbara, back to your original question about how do you choose a setting. I agree with David. It's not so much, well, at least in the case of the Clancy verse, it's not like you're trying to say, hey, here's what's going to happen next. But I do think that the Clancy brand speaks to, hey, let's highlight an area where there's geopolitical tension and explore it a little bit and try to humanize it a bit and make it real for people, and then create a conflict where characters have to deal with it. And so I certainly try to do, and then there's the aspect of variety. You can't just have the Chinese be the villains all the time, et cetera, right? You kind of have to move around. And so this book, Terminal Velocity, I picked India Pakistan, which is kind of a perennial flashpoint, but I thought it would be interesting to reintroduce that, given the growing power of China and some things of that nature. So anyway, that's how I always think about it.
I wanted to commend Don, because when Don was writing Clancy, hard to keep up, one of his books was about Korea, South Korea, North Korea, and I thought that was wonderful because, again, that's not a territory. We tend to focus on the larger, Russia, whatever it is. I mean, Korea. And then here we are. Maybe it was K-pop. Was that what did you in? Because, I mean, there's all this great Korean stuff suddenly coming at us. So
That was my first assignment right out of flight school. So it was back in the late 90s. So before September 11th, they used to say that the Korean Peninsula was the closest you could come to war, because they were still on a war footing. It still technically is now, but the North Koreans were crazy. And every so often they would shell parts of South Korea or sink a bunch of boats. And actually, one of the times when I was there, we thought we were going to war and actually broke out our go-to-war stock because the two navies were fighting and we were loading Hellfires on Apaches. And in Korea, I flew Apaches, and they have this really unique mission in that the first half of the war, because the North Koreans have these little boats that the North Koreans have the largest special operations forces in the world, and they use these people like human missiles and human cruise missiles. And so they'll have a team whose assignment is a particular South Korean foreign minister, and they send them on these really fast boats down the side of the coast, or they parachute them in, and they have one-way tickets to South Korea. And so their job is to kill that guy and then cause as much trouble as they can before they're either killed or, in their mind, the North Korean horde comes down and do it. And so as Apaches, the first half of the war, you got to go overseas, work with the Navy, and fly out over the water, which no Apache should ever be out over the water. But there you are, hunting boats and shooting them and stuff. And so it was fantastic as an assignment for a junior officer. And so when I wrote that book, I took every single pilot I could remember that I flew with and put all their call signs and stuff in it as well. And so it was a fun book to write, and kind of a fun homage to the men and women I got to serve with.
And before we get on to Jack with the Clancy thing, I wanted to point out, when I was writing up something today, Red Tide is published by the Naval Institute Press. So those of you who know Tom Clancy will recognize that he too, The Hunt for Red October, wasn't it, was also published by the Naval Institute Press. So what do you think, Mike? Is that like a good omen?
Yeah, I like to think so. I don't know. Everybody buy a book, and then it will be. No, I will say that when we're writing Clancy, and it's for a very big publisher, G.P. Putnam and Sons, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, and Naval Institute Press tends to do nonfiction. So it's been fun to do a fiction book because they're excited about it. So it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to be with a different kind of publisher for a change of pace.
Yeah, and most publishers are in New York City. And where is the Naval Institute Press?
They're in Annapolis.
Yeah, in Annapolis. My son was at the Naval Academy this summer doing some training, and hopefully he wants to go there next year. And I went and visited the Naval Institute Press, and they had nothing but glowing things to say about Mike. So
I too have visited the Naval Annapolis and the naval thing, and what I want to know is, how does anybody actually go off the diving board that is required? It's like 100 frickin' feet up there. I mean, I saw some kid who got to the end and absolutely couldn't do it, and I thought there was no way I would ever have been able. So, do people wash out over the diving board because it's the height of the ship? Is that what it is?
Well, so it is something in the Navy that you do have to be able to jump off of tall. So the aircraft carrier, the flight deck is 60
Right.
feet. And so the platform you have to dive off of or jump off of at the Naval Academy is 10 meters. So it's not quite that high, but it is required training. And when I was there, because I went to the Naval Academy, and so my whole class was lined up, and we're watching people jump off, and we jump off, and then we're cheering on our classmates. And there was a guy up there. He was the last one, and he'd get to the edge, and he'd look down, and he'd freak out, and was like, "No, I can't do it. I can't do it." So we're all cheering for him, and we're like, "You can do it. You can do it." And he goes, "All right, I'm going to do it." And he just runs and jumps off, and he comes down flat. And he was coming down flat. And at the last second, he piked and did this most beautiful dive. And then we realized he was a recruited diver. He was just messing with us.
I love it. Right. Well, you can see I have actually no qualifications for hosting all these thriller events, so I throw out whatever I can, right, to see how it goes. I think that it would be great if we could take a few questions, and I have with me a selection of advanced reading copies, because I get like 200 a month, so it's wonderful to give them away. And so if you raise your hand and you get called on, I will give you an advanced reading copy. The first one's called Leverage, which has something to do with the TV show in substance if you watch it. So Don, you're in charge, so ask for questions.
Who has a question for this lovely panel? Yes, sir.
Question for David. So when you were researching the assassination techniques, did you get into detail on how Mossad did the whole supply chain with the pagers and all that kind of stuff? I mean, I don't know if Iran could do that. It was incredible what they did. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. The pager attack was remarkable just from the standpoint of it's a supply chain operation where instead of infecting the supply chain, you become the supply chain and actually fabricate the product for the other end, which makes it really remarkable. The Iranians, the Israelis have a lot of advantages when they try to operate in Iran that the Iranians do not have when it comes to operating in Israel. But, I mean, namely the fact that in Iran, there's a bunch of, first of all, it's a massive country. There are, cracks, different ethnicities, like a bunch of people inside the country who despise the regime. And so the Israelis have a recruitment pool that they can use, which they use to great effect over the summer. You can find mirrors of that in Israel. And so it was not likely, but it was the sort of conceit in my book is plausible, but unlikely for how the Iranians might be able to actually recruit people inside Israel unwittingly to do things for them. And there's some precedent for it. There's actually been a spate of attacks inside Israel, arson, and things like that have been perpetrated by Israelis who have been recruited, usually online, by the Iranians. And so the book takes it one step further with a kind of group of support assets inside Israel who are helping the Iranians place essentially kamikaze drones that they use against Mossad.
Who's our next victim?
Come on, guys, I have several more books to give away. Don't just sit there.
I got another question.
No. No.
This is a quick one. Is Artemis going to continue in this?
Oh, yeah. So
Wrestling alligators?
So Artemis, this one is a standalone. There are no Americans in this book. It's just Israelis and Iranians. But Artemis and a lot of the sort of gang from the 7th floor will be back in the 5th book. So they're coming back next year.
Killed off Sam.
I know. I'm sorry.
Anyone else? Yes. Yay.
Do you ever have to have your books reviewed by the military or CIA or anything for disclosing anything?
I do not.
I tell people I do, but I don't. So yeah.
Yeah.
You do, don't you? No, David does, I'm sure. Yeah. Right.
Review board. Yeah. They're actually surprisingly very fast. I like to think it's because they just love the books so much they read them quickly. I don't think that's true. But they edit and they redact stuff with like a black highlighter. You know, like it's 1965. They'll send it back and weirdly they send I send it to them as a Word document and then it comes back to me in like 40 PDFs legitimately where they like page by page and everything's all caps when they send it back. So I don't know what program it goes to. It's all capitalized and they redact it with the black highlighter. And they say you can appeal the process, but you really can't.
So that's back to Mike's point about we need to move on from fighting backwards and move forward with technology. This book by Joel Dicker is a Swiss author, and it's an incredibly great heist story set in Switzerland. So really a great book. All right. Anyone else? I can take the books home. I mean, yeah.
So you all mentioned that going backwards. How would you assess Vietnam? Were we behind or ahead, or how would you assess it?
Way behind.
Well, I can speak from the aviation perspective. At the time, the aviation world, they thought that we were never going to dogfight again, right? So all our fighters that were over in Vietnam, they didn't use guns, and it was missiles only. We weren't never going to get within visual range of another fighter, and that's the whole reason why Top Gun exists today, because we were losing so many fighters to the North Vietnamese, and so we kind of learned that lesson and decided we were going to train people in how to dogfight and how to use our guns. And so it's kind of the same thing where we're kind of experiencing that now with technology, where we think, oh, we've got stealth. We don't need to worry about anything else because they're never going to see us. But the truth is, stealth isn't the end-all, be-all. And a lot of what the Chinese and a lot of what the Russians are doing is electronic attack. And electronic attack is really a much more cost-effective way of defeating the enemy. And so we're sort of having to, go back and forth between, are we too ahead of our times or too behind? And we can't seem to sync up with what our enemy is doing.
So your book by Nelson DeMille, A Little, because he died, sadly, and his son Alex, who is great. And we're going to be doing an event with Alex, but it's a virtual event. It was you, wasn't it? Right. Comes out at the end of October. I really miss Nelson. He was a wonderful, sort of old school, but terrific. Okay, we have one more. No? All right, I'll take them home.
I have another question.
Okay.
So do you use AI for writing, and how are you dealing with all that artificial intelligence?
That question has been asked at every book event, and I am going to say this. The reason, in fact, part of the reason that you see all these guys here is that you now know that they are not using AI to write their books based on this discussion. And I am actually ramping up our live events program because if they're standing here with me, by God, they wrote their book. And I don't want that to start creeping in. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I think AI is useful for research. I mean, you
Yeah.
almost can't avoid it because you just Google something and then it goes, oh, well, here's the whole thing. My concerns around AI, like all these guys, is much more around copyright protection. Yeah, which I mean, clearly there need to be some controls put in place. We can't just take an NFL game and rebroadcast it and go, oh, look what we did, right? So I think that this is something that our legislature needs to take up very soon.
There's our agent sent out a thing, I'm assuming to you too, but there's a big class action lawsuit right now around AI from authors because they used books without permission to train the AI engines and stuff like that now. So we'll see what happens. But like what these guys, so I have a daughter that's a senior in college, and she's a electrical engineer and computer science minor, and she's like, it's awful right now because you can use AI to do the coding for you. And she's like, the professors are having a heck of a time trying to figure out, did the kid do this? Did AI do the coding for you and stuff? And so, from as a writer perspective, you just find that repugnant, like the thought that somebody would just use a computer to do the thing that you do. But I'm sure, to Barbara's point, I'm sure folks are doing it right now and throwing books up on Amazon. So
I like to think that depth of character and sense of humor and that kind of thing, which I don't think you can train a machine to do, well, eventually it'll be possible. But there are lots of people who just want to read sort of a bare bones, fast-paced story and don't care. I could actually name 2 or 3 writers that I'm reasonably convinced are using AI to write their books at the moment, but I'm not going to do that. Mike, did you have something else you wanted to say? Jack.
I wanted to say, taking over, from Mike for the Jack Ryan Jr. series, there's a huge catalog of books that I have to now be aware of. And some of them, Don is responsible for, guilty of. I don't know how you want to say it. But
Guilty, that's good.
I would love to create an AI where I can input all the books and then be able to ask a very simple question and get a very simple answer. Because right now I have to go through all my copies of the books to find the answer and say, I remember him doing this, and I can't remember which book it was, and I have to search through it all. That's how I would find AI useful. Right now I just bug Don, and he just says, go away.
I tell him the wrong answer.
Of course you do.
So what parameters are you given when you say now you're writing Tom Clancy? Or was the estate, or however it happened, did they say it has to be within these parameters? And you, between the 3 of you, do you get to change those parameters? Or you're all within?
Sure.
All right. So the guidance I got a couple years ago was, all right, so for Jack Ryan Jr., and it was, all right, for Jack Ryan Sr., we want fleets to move, right? We want kind of big military things happening. For Junior, the guidance I got was, no, it needs to be more of an individual story around that character. And but I felt strongly, and I know Don did, that it's still Tom Clancy, so you still have to make it about geopolitics. So it was always kind of challenging, I think, in the Junior series to have something that's relevant to everybody geopolitically and sort of have the threat of this military movement or this existential crisis, but have it come down to a set of individuals. And then they wanted a certain length and a certain time frame and other things really to differentiate the 2 series.
But you can't really rewrite the backstory, right? I mean, you can't.
No. You inherit the
You can't
the
divorce
universe.
them or kill them or things
No,
like that.
you can evolve
Can you?
characters. Yeah. So Don created a couple of characters that I picked up and did. I created a couple of characters that
No,
I hope
I'm sorry,
Jack doesn't
I meant,
kill.
but the main character, Jack.
Yeah,
you
no,
can't,
you can't kill him.
mess with the Ryan family.
Spoiler
right?
alert!
No.
Yeah, Jack Ryan dead,
Would not-
kaput.
would
yeah,
not work out.
assassinated.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is true of all legacy publishing. I mean, there's a lot of it. There's the Robert Parker franchise, and Dick Francis's son is writing Dick Francis, who turned out to be actually Mary Francis all along. We found out later. But there's a tradition of legacy publishing, and within that, there's a lot of variation. So let's thank our authors for coming tonight. They've been absolutely great. And at this point, we don't, I think, actually have any great numerical way to do this tonight, so we'll just line up. If you guys could fold up your chairs and move them against that wall. This wall, the chairs will slide down and cut your feet out from under you, so you don't want to really do that. Over there, and then just kind of line up, and you can get your books signed or take photos. Thank you all very much for coming. Sorry. I realized that I made a mistake. Is Nathan still here? Because Nathan had something he wanted to give away tonight. Nathan, we didn't really come up with a mechanism.